Good morning, and welcome to the first of a two-part series, Developing Local Purchase of Agricultural Conservation Easement Programs, hosted by the American Farmland Trust. I am Angie Doucette, American Farmland Trust Midwest Farmland Protection Manager, and I am truly grateful you have joined us here today. Here is the agenda for our 90 minutes together today. We're going to talk about purchase of agricultural easement programs, or PACE programs. These are popular state and local programs that have helped thousands of landowners around the country to protect their farm or ranch land. More than 4 million acres of land have been permanently protected through these programs. Before we begin, I'd like to cover some logistics. Everyone here has been muted and attendee cameras are off, so no need to worry about that. If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, you could do so by going to the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. The orange arrow at the top of the panel allows the panel to shrink and to reopen. You will also see a question section of the control panel. Please use this section today for all your comments and questions that you have for our great speakers. We will allow for plenty of time for questions after each of our speakers. We just ask that you reserve the chat function for any technical difficulties. And finally, we are recording this webinar and we'll send the link to the recording to everyone who is registered. We ask that you please feel free to share this recording widely. So for those of you not familiar with American Farmland Trust, we are a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. Some of you know us best by our No Farms, No Food bumper sticker. We understand agriculture and we take a holistic approach to it. Our national initiatives and regional programs focus not just on protecting the land base, but also on the practices used on the land and on the farmers and ranchers who work the land now and in the future. Our programs and research inform our state and federal policy advocacy and analysis. We work from farm fields and kitchen tables to the halls of state capitals and Congress, with 6 regional offices and a national office located in Washington, D.C. So now let me introduce our first speaker and MC for the day, Chris Coffin. Chris is the director of American Farmland Trust's National Agricultural Land Network, which is an information and peer learning network for professionals and community advocates working to save farm and ranch land. Chris is also American Farmland Trust Senior Policy Advisor, specializing in farmland protection, land access, and farm viability. Thank you, Chris.
Great, thank you, Angie, and welcome to everybody on this webinar today. Really looking forward to this conversation. I'm going to turn my video off so I'm not distracting and people can see the slides at a larger scale. But one of the things that separates American Farmland Trust from many other land trusts is our knowledge of agriculture. We recognize that farmland is not farmland without the people who work that land, and that farmland is more likely to remain in agricultural use when farms are profitable. But we also recognize that for many farmers and farmland owners, their land is their equity and often their retirement. And without an opportunity to extract that equity from their land through another means, many farmers and landowners sell land or lease it in the case of solar development for development to finance family needs. So this is why AFT talks about planning for agriculture. Purchase of agricultural conservation easement programs are just one in a suite of tools that we encourage communities and states to consider. A supportive business environment for farming is essential. So this includes considering the many and varied needs of agricultural businesses, from on and off farm infrastructure to the regulatory environment to market development and farm support services. It also includes thinking about ways to encourage compact development in a community through planning, zoning, and recognizing through property taxes that agricultural land is a net revenue producer for communities. Whether the analogy is tools in a toolbox or lures in a tackle box, communities need to think holistically about supporting the business of agriculture, including the land that is foundational to those businesses. PACE programs are most effective when used in conjunction with these other tools. So now we're going to go through a basics or primer about conservation easements and then agricultural conservation easements and then purchase of agricultural conservation easement programs. Those programs are also known as PDR or purchase of development right programs. So let's talk about conservation easements first. A conservation easement limits the type and quality of development that can occur on the land. Conservation easement is a voluntary legal agreement. It is almost always perpetual. There can be easements that are not perpetual. These are typically referred to as term easements or covenants. Landowners can donate an easement, and that donation can be claimed as a federal tax deduction. In places where there is a program to do so, a landowner can sell an easement. In some cases, landowners may sell an easement for less than its fair market value. This is known as a bargain sale, and a landowner can claim a federal tax deduction on the donated portion of the easement. Land under easement stays in private ownership. It stays on the local tax rolls, and the owner of the land can sell the land to whomever they choose, whenever they choose. Lastly, the easement runs with the land, meaning that all future owners of the land must abide by the terms of the easement. And lastly, the easement is held by a land trust or a government agency. So that government agency or land trust is the easement holder, and they have the right and the responsibility to monitor and enforce the terms of the easement. So let's now talk about what an agricultural conservation easement is, because it is a form of conservation easement. The term is generally used in connection with public programs that purchase these types of easements. These programs, as I mentioned, are interchangeably known as PACE programs or purchase of development right programs, PDR. An agricultural conservation easement is specifically focused on protecting agricultural land for future agricultural use. What type of development and uses are allowed with an agricultural conservation easement will depend on who holds the easement. In the case of a donated easement, that easement is typically negotiated between the landowner and the easement holder, usually a land trust. In the case of an easement that is purchased through a public PACE or PDR program, what is allowed or restricted in an easement is usually spelled out through the program regulations or rules. An agricultural conservation easement will limit non-farm related development. It may limit how the property can be subdivided. It typically allows for some future subdivision, and it will generally not require public access. It typically does allow agricultural infrastructure, on-farm energy production, and housing, sometimes for both owner housing and for farm labor housing. The point of an agricultural conservation easement is to be flexible and recognize that farm operations change and evolve over time. So let's talk about how easements are valued. The valuing of an easement is typically established through an appraisal. So an appraiser will determine the land's fair market value, usually based on comparable land sales. So there in this example, you see here the graph is a total that the total value would be its fair market value. The appraiser will then determine its value if its future use is restricted to agriculture. So we call that the after value. The difference in the values will determine the value of the easement. So you see here that this would be, in an appraisal, the fair market value would be $10,000 an acre. The after value, once the easement is put on, what might be, in this case, this is purely an example. Don't use these numbers as thinking that that's what it looks like in any particular situation. The after value would be $4,000. So these easement values will vary depending on location of a farm and the development pressure in a community. Where there is a lot of non-farm development pressure, that after the fair market value is likely to be quite high. And depending what the market is for agricultural land in a community or an area, that land value as protected will fluctuate as well. And so there can be instances where the value of farmland for farming is very high, and in places where there is little development pressure, that easement value may not be very much. So let's keep going and talk about purchase of agricultural conservation easement programs. Again, you see here that this is where you can pay. What we're talking about is paying property owners. It's the sale or the purchase of an agricultural conservation easement. Those are always voluntary. A landowner or farmer can choose to enroll in the program or not. Again, it's the sale of that easement. And importantly, a state or a local PACE program can leverage federal funding for agricultural conservation easements. That's through a USDA program known as the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program. There is quite significant funding for it, and additional funding that was enacted by Congress over the summer. So let's look then at the first PACE program that was created. That was a response to the frustrations of farmers in Suffolk County, New York, that's on Long Island, with increasing land values and the inability to capture that value without selling the farm. Challenged by, as the saying goes, being land rich and cash poor, farm leaders in the county proposed the novel idea that they sell their ability to develop their land for non-agricultural purposes. In return for agreeing to recording a deed restriction on their land, permanently restricting future development. Recognizing the value of protecting privately managed land for active agricultural use to the region's economy and reducing the need for additional public infrastructure investments to support residential development, the county agreed to start a program funded by tax dollars way back in 1974. So, since that was the first one in 1974, we have grown in terms of state and local PACE programs around the country. And here you can see the map. The local ones are the very light, where there's only a local program, are the very light yellow. The medium green are where there are state programs, and where there is the dark green, that is both where there are state and local programs. As of January 2022, 28 states have state-level programs. Of these, 16 also have local PACE programs. 4 additional states, Illinois, Indiana, Minnesota, and Montana, only have PACE programs at the local level. Illinois has 1 PACE program, and you will hear from the director of that program. That's in Kane County. Indiana has 1 PACE program, a county-based PACE program. Michigan has 9 local programs, and Wisconsin has 5 on the books. And so with that, I am going to pause. I think that's it on the sort of basic primer. So let me pause and see. Let me turn my video back on. I know it is early in the morning. Well, it's not that early in the morning, but if folks have questions, please feel free to put them in the question box. And again, for those of you who might have joined us a little bit late, the way that you get to the questions is you see that questions tab on your control panel. Click on that little box to the far right that has an arrow sticking out of it. That'll pop that questions tab up, and you can type your questions right into there. And so let me give it a minute. And in fact, while I'm waiting for questions, let me introduce our next panelist. And then if we do have any questions, I will, I'll answer them. But let me just say that our next panelist will be Remy Long. Remy Long is the City of Ann Arbor's Deputy Manager of Parks and Recreation Services, where he oversees the department's Natural Area Preservation Unit, charged with the stewardship of 1,400 acres of public parkland, as well as the department's Land Acquisition Unit, which covers both parkland purchases within the city, as well as a regional land preservation program known as the Greenbelt. Prior to joining the City of Ann Arbor, Remy worked for the Conservation Fund, a national environmental nonprofit, and for Legacy Land Conservancy, a regional land conservation group based in Southeast Michigan. Prior to his career in land conservation, Remy spent 3 years in West Africa as a Peace Corps volunteer, working as an agricultural extension agent. So let me see, I don't, oh, wait a minute, hang on, I do see, I'm sorry, I'm trying to open this tab. My questions tab is not being cooperative right now. So let me do this. Remy, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to go off camera and I will figure out how to make my questions tab work. And I will, for whoever asked a question or made a comment, I will get to it when we're done with Remy. So Remy, handing it off to you.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate that. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity to speak about the city's program and hopefully spread some inspiration. So to start, I'd like to briefly discuss the program, the context in which the program emerged, and then look at the function that it serves in the Ann Arbor community and region, and then finally cover some of the impacts the program has had to date. Trying to switch slides.
I mean, I can switch them for you if it's not working. You can just tell me next slide. How does that work?
Yeah, sure. Next slide. There we go. Thanks, Angie. So here we are in Michigan, the Great Lakes state, with a population of nearly 10 million. And it's the second most diverse agricultural economy in the United States, second only to California. And the heart of the Great Lakes, which represents 21% of the Earth's freshwater. Change. Zooming into Southeast Michigan, we see the expansive Metropolitan Detroit region, which contains nearly 50% of Michigan's population on just 6% of the state's land base. Next slide. And here sits Ann Arbor, positioned in within what is known as the Emerald Arc of state and local conservation lands buffering Metro Detroit, which serves as an agricultural and recreational base for supporting the densely populated region. Next slide. Ann Arbor is 30 square miles of a quiet college town with a population just over 120,000. And in the early 2000s, the Ann Arbor community began having discussions about what they could do. Slide change. To protect land for the thriving local food economy that serves much of Southeast Michigan. Next. Protect upstream green infrastructure to help ensure the city's source water protection as they draw their drinking water from the river that flows through the city. Next. And create recreational opportunities for the community. Next. So in time, a charismatic mayor transformed that idea into a campaign that drove the passage of a 2003 ballot initiative that received support from 67% of voters who approved a 30-year millage for protecting parkland within the city and supported funding regional farmland and open space preservation surrounding the city in what's known as the Greenbelt. Next. So this millage established the city's open space and parkland preservation program, which is housed within the city's Parks and Rec department. So the millage proceeds are split in 1/3, 2/3 to the two arms of the program's functions. So 1/3 of the revenue is dedicated to acquiring new parkland within the city limits, focused on connectivity, adjacency, high quality natural area preservation. And then 2/3 of the millage revenue is dedicated to acquisitions within the Greenbelt District surrounding the city. So what that means over the last nearly 20 years since the millage inception, within the city, we've completed 37 acquisitions for parkland worth over 14.7 million, adding 172 acres to the city's park system. These acquisitions constitute both natural areas and neighborhood parks with improvements and facilities. Then moving outside the city to the Greenbelt District, the program has completed 82 acquisitions and helped the city secure 35 federal awards, whether they be FRPP or ASEP ALE, which Chris mentioned earlier, or 2 RCPP awards. These are all federal matching funds available to PACE programs across the country. Over the last 20 years, totaling $14.5 million in federal funds to leverage our local millage dollars. So slide change past the next 2 slides. Angie, skip those. Next one. So this represents, This represents nearly 83 million in real estate in the city's Greenbelt District protected in perpetuity, with the city taxpayers, given the leverage that we've been able to secure at the federal and local level, only having to contribute $26.5 million to see that portfolio of $83 million worth of property protected in perpetuity. So what does this look like on the landscape? So next slide. This is a map of the city of Ann Arbor, and the green outline surrounding it is what's known as the Greenbelt District, a sort of semi-square containing about 85,000 acres worth of space. So this is a map of the Greenbelt District circa 2000. And the next, and here's the map today. Next. The city's Greenbelt program and its local partners have added 6,924 acres of preserved land to the map since 2003. While these may appear scattered, it should be noted that all of these acquisitions have been driven by landscape level analyses that have informed the program's acquisition strategy to create critical masses of protected land around the highly fragmented Ann Arbor area. The Greenbelt has helped the region create hubs of protected productive soils for the agricultural economy to persist upon, and space for the thriving local food economy to grow near those that it aims to serve, all within 5 miles of the Ann Arbor city limits. Next. So the Greenbelt's completed 82 acquisitions, as I mentioned. This includes 64 working farms, 8 farms source food currently to our local markets, and 7 new farmers, new and beginning farmers, were able to secure affordable farmland given the reduction in the value of the farmland price. So we created more accessible, affordable farmland opportunities in the Ann Arbor area. And we've secured a total of $35 million in external funding support from federal, state, and other local PACE programs that we share funding with to accomplish our work. Next. In terms of tangible ecological or environmental benefit and outcomes from this program, the Greenbelt has protected lands that touch over 28 miles of river, stream, and waterway frontage, and that's permanently protected frontage now. 79% of those waters are within the Huron River watershed, which is the watershed that the city of Ann Arbor collects its drinking water from. And then over 18% of the available farmland within the Greenbelt District has been protected to date. So as I mentioned, the Greenbelt District itself is about 85,000 acres. Well, actually only about 24,000 of that is productive agricultural land in current production. And so we've protected over 18% of that available farmland. We've helped establish 11 new public nature preserves. So in addition to private land conservation through this PACE program, we also do contribute matching funds to other local conservation agencies that purchase property in fee to own and manage as public nature preserves. So we've helped financially support 11 new acquisitions of public nature preserves, totaling over 700 acres with over 6 miles of trails available to the public. And that's the regional rural communities surrounding Ann Arbor, as well as the residents of Ann Arbor who can go there anytime and enjoy and recreate in those spaces. In total, over 1,500 acres of woodlands have been preserved and over 1,700 acres of wetlands. And then from a climate perspective, the total carbon storage capacity of the portfolio of 82 acquisitions funded by the city's Greenbelt program equates to 302,000 metric tons of CO2 perpetually stored, which is the equivalent of over 750 million miles driven by an average gasoline-powered passenger vehicle. Next. So a couple of examples on the ground of what this work has translated into. So this is an example of the Greenbelt partnering with another local PACE program, and in this case, that's a township, Ann Arbor Township, that led the acquisition of a conservation easement on a, I believe, 68-acre farm just north of the city limits. And so this was a case where there was a owner that was looking to both sell the property and protect it. And so Ann Arbor Township creatively set up a simultaneous transaction where they were able to protect the property in perpetuity with that conservation easement and lower that price so that the new farmer, a young couple, Jill and Nate Latta, were able to purchase the property and establish their business, Green Things Farm, which sources local produce to the Ann Arbor markets just north of town. Next. And then circling back to what I mentioned about supporting public nature preserve acquisitions by other partner agencies, Legacy Land Conservancy serves a 4-county area in Southeast Michigan. And so this is one property within the Greenbelt District where the city was able to contribute matching funds toward their acquisition of a 25-acre fee public nature preserve, which is owned and managed by Legacy and now open to the public, called the Shatter Family Nature Preserve. So next. So we have 11 years. Again, I mentioned this was a 30-year millage, which is a long millage for the voters to have approved, but it really takes that long to realize that this work, a 5-year or a 10-year millage. And given the length of time that it takes to put these packages together to fund and complete these deals from beginning to end, a 30-year millage was really the time we needed to help see that landscape level change and add that acreage to the map. So with 10 more years-ish to go until 2033 when the millage expires, we are focused on prioritizing and preserving the highest quality lands that remain within that Greenbelt District, focusing on connectivity and protecting highly productive soils, and then developing tools that go beyond metrics of just dollars and acres. In this presentation, I shared a lot of dollars and acres, 6,924 acres, $83 million worth of real estate. Those are low-hanging fruit in terms of quantifying and communicating the benefits of these programs and what we're able to accomplish with financial leverage. But in terms of ecosystem services and biodiversity benefits, serving the wider community and investing now for those benefits to play out in perpetuity, we need to develop new tools to improve reporting on those secondary, tertiary objectives of the Greenbelt program beyond just farmland protection. And then finally, as I mentioned, we are keen on supporting new and beginning farmers' access to affordable land. So we are trying to develop innovative transaction structures and policies within the city's program to support access for that next generation of farmers to keep farmers on the land. All right, I'll leave it at that.
Great. Thank you so much, Remy. That was terrific. So let me go back to answer a couple of questions that came in during my presentation. And then, Remy, there's a question for you. And a reminder to all of us panelists that somebody noted that we have been using a lot of acronyms. So we will try and make sure that we spell out what we mean with those acronyms. So one of the first questions that came in was, can you please expand on the heart of the easement definition, selling their ability to develop land? And yes, let me go back through again and talk a little bit more about the sale of an agricultural conservation easement. Typically, we like to think of landowners as owning a bundle of rights in their land. One of those rights is to sell the land to whomever they want for whatever price they want. And another right is the right to develop the property. That right is limited often by local regulations, particularly zoning regulations, but it might be housing codes as well. But generally, that's the right that is to be able to develop land. So selling, what an easement is, it's actually a negative. It is restricting a landowner's right to make certain uses of their land. And in this case, for an agricultural conservation easement, it is restricting the right to develop the land in certain ways. And typically that is to either develop or to sell the land to someone who is going to develop a non-agricultural development. So that could be commercial or residential or industrial, or in some cases, utility scale solar development. Many of these things would not be allowed under an agricultural conservation easement. But it's important to keep in mind that these easements do have flexibility, and that flexibility depends on the program. And if you are setting up a county PACE program or local PACE program, you have the ability to decide some of those things that an easement can spell out. Do you want to allow the owner of that property to be able to build a house? Many public PACE programs do allow that. They allow for the construction of farm labor housing. Sometimes that housing is restricted by square footage in order that you can't build huge mansions on a permanently protected piece of land. It also will typically allow for the construction of agricultural infrastructure. So that is barns and sheds and some farm roads, some fencing, and in some cases, there is the allowance for a landowner to continue to have businesses on the farm that are not incompatible with agriculture. And so how those, all of the things that are allowed in those easements are typically done through a program with decisions that are made, and it's very important in creating a program to be engaging the agriculture community on what those easements should allow and what those rights should be. So I hope that's helped to spell it out a little bit more, and as panelists are presenting. If anybody wants to expand on that, that would be welcome. Let me go to a second question, which is how are state and local PACE or Purchase of Agricultural Conservation Easement programs different from the federal program that I mentioned that is funded through the federal Farm Bill? That is the program that funds most of the USDA agriculture programs, as well as nutrition programs and conservation programs, rural development programs. So that federal program, which Remy referred to as well as the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, is a source of matching funds for these state and local PACE programs. It has its own eligibility criteria. So there are, if one is creating a county program or a local program, one might want to look at some of the requirements of the federal program, because it may be that those requirements need to be kept in mind if you're creating a program, so that in fact that can be used as a leverage. So those, again, the easement terms those requirements in the federal program, it does have a set of specific easement terms. So if it is compatible with that state or county program, it can be leveraged, and it is a 50% leverage. The federal program will pay up to 50% of the easement value. And so with that, let me go on. Remy, there was a question for you, which was the question about the 7 new farmers. And there is also, so let me ask the question about the farmers. It said, are those 7 new farmers all providing local food? Those numbers seem pretty low. So is it serving existing farming systems and wealth as opposed to helping to get new farmers on the land? So that is a question for you, Remy.
Yeah, it's a great question. So as I mentioned, there are 64 working farms that have been protected through the Greenbelt program, and the subset of 7 is those new and beginning land insecure farmers that were able to purchase more affordable farmland because of the permanent protection that the Greenbelt helped to realize on that property. I think missing from so many PACE programs is a parallel complementary effort of affordable farmland access programming at a local or national scale. And that's where organizations like AFT and National Young Farmers Coalition are really instrumental in supporting and building out programming to support farmland access, because as a PDR program, as a land conservation program, often the funds and the millages or the constraints around how we're able to utilize our funding to accomplish our goals is restricted simply to the protection of the property and not facilitating the intergenerational transfer of land between those farmers. So we are one piece, as Chris mentioned. There's this suite of farmland viability considerations and tools that organizations like AFT work on. And PACE programs are one key component of the larger success story that needs to play out. So we don't have a lot of legal or tangible control to help with that intergenerational transfer, but there are innovative transactional models. One that's being more widely used on a national scale is called Buy, Protect, Sell, where a conservation agency like the city's Greenbelt program actually purchases a farm, not just the development rights, but purchases a farm outright, and then develops a public request for proposals to solicit proposals to select a new farmer to sell that property to. So there are in-process ways that we're trying to push the envelope to insert ourselves in that land access equation and make improvements, but historically we have been limited by the restrictions tied to our funding.
Great, thanks for that, Remy. Yes, you're right. That could be a whole new webinar in and of itself in terms of the sort of additional tools that are needed to support the intergenerational transfer. Here is a question. Someone said they've never heard the term millage. I'm assuming it's similar to a bond referendum. You want to explain what millage is?
Yeah, sorry, that's Michigan often uses millages, which is a property tax effectively. So depending on the millage rate, a half mil, 1 mil, 2 mil, and the term that the mill's designated for, and in this case, a 30-year millage. The Greenbelt millage, or the Open Space and Parkland Preservation millage, is a half mil for 30 years, which equates to roughly $100 per $100 per taxpayer per $100,000 worth of property, assessed value property that they own. So if you own a $300,000 assessed value home in the city of Ann Arbor, you are paying $300 toward the city's Greenbelt millage to help fund these efforts of parkland purchases and regional land preservation through the Greenbelt. So millages are often used in communities to fund different initiatives, whether it be improving roads and other programming, but that's often how we see the PDR programs funded here in Michigan.
Great. A couple of other questions. One is a comment, actually. Remy has an excellent model program functioning. Can we get the criteria in detail from him for us to use as a template? Is that possible?
Absolutely. Much of it is available on our website. If it's not, please reach out. I will get you what you need. If you are looking for a copy of the ordinance that governs the use of the funds and structures restrictions and permissions of what we're able to do with our millage funding and revenue, that's also available online. It's Chapter 42 of the City Code. But yeah, happy to field and provide any resources if folks reach out with specifics. But if you're looking for how we rank and prioritize, depending on how detailed you want to get, and we'll go all the way to the GIS mapping spatial level, yeah, happy to set up a meeting and discuss that.
Great, thank you. There are a couple of other questions that I'm going to hold till the end because I think having everybody's points on them would be great. But I do want to go back to a question which is back around, the question was that not about when I was discussing what is the restriction and how an agricultural conservation easement operates. Its follow-up question is who is buying that easement, and do they get the ability to develop the land? So let me circle back around because it's a good point and I didn't make that clear. When you put an easement on the land, again, this is either whether it is sold or it's donated, but let's stick to sold easements because that's what we're talking about in the context of PACE programs. That easement or that negative, that restriction is what it is, called a conservation easement, but it's a restriction, is purchased by the government agency. So in this case, it would be a county PACE program. In that case, for the vast majority of times, what that government agency has the authority to do, they don't have the authority to sell that restriction to anybody else. They are the easement holder, and their responsibility in perpetuity is to monitor and enforce the terms of the easement. So if if a county created a PACE program, that county in perpetuity would need to ensure that the terms of the easement are being enforced. And so that does, in sort of thinking about what are the requirements for a county PACE program, is the ability to continue to enforce easement terms. And that is a requirement, and that's not something to be entered into lightly. And I suspect that Remy can talk more about that because he has been dealing with those kinds of things. But Remy, anything you want to add to that before we turn it over to Janice?
Just as a consideration, a lot of a best practice in the industry is to make sure that when you are agreeing to these perpetual deed restrictions, that you as an agency, a municipality, are then signing up to enforce in perpetuity. It is smart thinking out the gate to prepare yourselves financially for the long-term viability of these agreements by setting aside an official or a quasi-endowment fund. So at the Greenbelt, we use, for those 82 acquisitions, for every acquisition we do, we set aside roughly $24,000 into an account that serves as a quasi legal and enforcement and endowment account to make sure that once the millage revenue stops in 2033, we have the financial sustainability to continue enforcing these agreements into the future. So I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you.
And thanks so much for the opportunity.
Great, well, thank you so much. And we will circle back around because we'll have questions for everybody at the end. So let me now introduce our next panelist, Janice Hill, who is the Farmland Protection Manager of Kane County, Illinois. Welcome, Janice. So glad that you can be with us. Janice is the owner of Acreage 43560 LLC, a planning consulting practice supporting local farmers and communities. Serving as the Farmland Protection Manager and Executive Planner for Kane County, Illinois, which is the only county-based PACE program in Illinois, Janice creates and launches long-range and strategic plans for Kane County and leads local and regional agricultural efforts. She has 15 years experience in municipal planning, has a Master of City of Planning from University of Pennsylvania, and is an American Institute certified planner. Welcome, Janice. Turning it over to you.
Good morning, everybody. That was a great introduction from Chris and Remy. I really enjoy hearing about everyone else's program. Sometimes we do such a deep dive into our own work that it's really helpful to hear what else is happening around the country. And so thank you for that. And then it gives me the opportunity to compare and contrast the efforts that we've done in Kane County and some of the guidance that I've given other communities nearby and then in the Midwest as well about what my learning has been around this work in the last 20 plus years. So with that, I'm going to also come off camera so you can get a full view of my slides and then come back on at the end. So I'm going to do the same thing that Chris did and go from there. So with that, hopefully I have controls of the slides. You know what, Angie, I'm not being able to move this,
That's okay.
having that same difficulty. So I'll let you do that and then I'll just talk and you can do slides. You can go to the next one. Just to give, backstory and context to our work. Our Farmland Protection Program is really the fulfillment of implementation strategies from our longstanding land use and natural resource policies and plans. When I did research, in 1999, before the launch of our program, I found documents that went back to the early 1970s from our planning department and calling for the establishment of one of these farmland protection programs, specifically a purchase of development rights program, that it could really be beneficial to Kane County. And then I also found regional documents calling out this issue of land use loss for all of the counties adjacent to us and at the edge of the Chicago metro area. And in these documents, not only was there called out the issue of potential development on those, but the supreme quality of our soils. We have mostly prime soils and soils of statewide importance in Kane County, primarily in corn and soybean production. And so the threat of future development was really seen back in the 70s. Now, I have to say that our plans then and now are not anti-development. They're really calling for a growth strategy that's going to direct development toward the cities and municipalities where we have the infrastructure. So in the case of this map, that's our blue area along the Fox River, where we have cities that have the infrastructure to handle new development. The central corridor, which is our critical growth area, also has room for some development, but we wanted to make sure that that development is very controlled, given the fragility of our natural resources there. And then finally, in those western townships, in that light green color, that's our primarily agricultural area, where we called for retention of that and not to develop our county edge to edge, corner to corner. A little different from the Ann Arbor program and the Greenbelt program, our farmland protection strategy and our open space natural resource strategy are two different programs. So you're going to see that dark green there. Those are our forest preserves and open space, and then the light green for proposed, funded through a separate program. However, we do work very closely to make sure we have that linkages. So I would say probably the first important takeaway from our program is that it really gives a solid foundation, because we've used planning and planning tools and land use policies as the foundation. And then it's also, you know, I think that the test is really that it survived the political turnover. 4 different county board chairs, and then it hasn't stood solid and unchanging. We have these companion ordinances, which I can go over a little later, that we've adjusted over time to capture the needs of the community. Okay, next slide. So, you know, part of this drive at the time, and even today, is due to these land consumption patterns that we experience at the Chicago Metro Edge. There's been lots of documentation, and I think we were just there to heed the warnings from lots of different groups, including AFT, showing us that we have suburban sprawl, and to be careful once we lose that soil that it can't really be reclaimed. And so I think the start of our program, I would say, had to do with heeding that warning and also realizing this is going to affect the infrastructure of our community, the schools, the roads, and water. And so that's what this slide represents. Okay, next slide. So what we have to work with right now, our framework is on the left, our flagship program, which is for our farmland protection, the purchase of those agricultural conservation easements that we've talked about. It also gives the authority to do the purchase of land. We've never done that. We haven't had to, we haven't been asked to, but we do have that authority. The authority gives us the opportunity to purchase development rights, do the bargain sale, or accept donated easements, and that's been very important to our program as well. And those rights are extinguished, and that's another thing that's very important to know in our ordinance, that this is not a transfer program. This calls for those rights once the county purchases them, sometimes in cooperation with NRCS programs, that they're extinguished, and those rights aren't to appear anywhere else in the county. 10 years later, 12 years later, ended up creating this Kane County Local Foods Growing for Kane program, which has been critical to supporting our food farms. As I mentioned, we're primarily corn and soybeans, but we do have a growing local foods program, and we needed to be able to be clear that we were supporting easements, both permanent and perpetual, in all locations in the county. Okay, next slide. Probably the best lesson that we learned and we continue to do is we really use consultants to help us in talking about this topic. Those critical reports from American Farmland Trust and other organizations have really helped us explain why we need to pursue this work. Okay, next slide. And it's really paid off, I think. You know, sometimes when you use the voice of a consultant to echo what staff already has researched and known, especially to an audience that can be, you know, maybe skeptical, quizzical about how this is all going to work, we've used these consultants and we've been able to tailor the programs to our local environment. And I think that's also been part of the success. Certainly we have all the benefits that you see on the right, the land protection itself, the fact that these are businesses, family businesses, these farms are, that we have used this model of really public-private partnership. And we've even been able to accommodate a new development model while still permanently protecting farmland within that. I think that shows to all of our county constituents that we work on equity, and that's yielded political support in the program. And then over on the left, you can see some of how this lays out. We have existing easements that are shown in the brown and the other ones that are in process. It's a program that evolves over time and has its own flow to it. You have the stats in the center. I will say probably the most interesting thing and welcome thing is that the farms have stayed in the hands of local ownership. It may have, the exchanges may have been to different generations or to neighboring farms, but this is truly an economic development retention strategy of keeping farmers on the land. And we have had 2 donated easements as well. Okay, next slide. This process is voluntary, and I always remind people of this because while as planners we can look and identify the best locations to do the best things, really when it comes down to it, it's driven by local landowners. They often spend a lot of time in this learning and thinking stage, and then they will take it under consideration and then come in and get their paperwork, and then finally we begin the process. Okay, next slide. And I would say one of our top outcomes is that our county board has upheld their land use policies by not approving land uses other than agriculture in our western townships. They've upheld the plan, and this program helps remind them of that. I think their investment over time and then meeting monthly with our agriculture committee to talk about all things agriculture, including this program and our Growing for Kane program, reinforces and gives them support for upholding the plan. Okay, next slide. You know, the other thing I think that has been a benefit that was unexpected but very welcome is the community's support of the intrinsic value of farmland in our community. You know, we're right here at the edge of Chicago metro area. Not everybody, in fact, most of our community does not live in this farmland, right? So supporting this identity of Kane County and its agriculture benefits to all of us is something that everyone has embraced. You know, my friend Peggy Sutton is an artist in Kendall County. As part of their effort early on looking at programs, she contributed her artwork to this. We have a rustic roads program. We have a local farm named after our rustic roads program. We have farmers identifying their products as Kane County grown, and we have our membership organization all supporting the quality of life that agriculture brings. And I believe it truly supports our land protection program. Next slide. You know, another reason why I think we've been successful, and I think this is shared by the Ann Arbor program, is that we are really inclusive. We're supporting farms of all types, and that includes our local food farms, because most of our households are in that critical growth and urban area that I showed you. And while they may not relate to corn and beans, soy farms, they do relate to the local food programs. So our Growing for Kane program offering easements as small as 4 acres has been really helpful. Next slide. And then the other thing that's really critical, I think, is that we are a family-focused, locally driven program. I mentioned the stability that comes from this, the fact that these are families that we know From the standpoint of a local government official, I have to say that I don't take the approach of them as applicants. I really think of them as clients and friends coming to our county and supporting our county, and that has paid off tremendously, adding a face and family focus to our program. It's not required, but it's just what has happened. And then when it comes to partners, big shout out to the Conservation Fund and our friends there, because they have added to this potential by adding an RCPP opportunity for us, so we'll be able to double our investment in the coming years. Next slide. And, you know, I always think about the challenges that are facing us will yield benefits that maybe I'm not able to clearly identify at this point, but I think you will find in 10 years that our easement programs will be part of addressing climate change in our county, and knowing that we have that stability, that permanent land base to be able to bring some climate smart incentives and test them out really in this area and our coming easement areas will be critical to addressing water quality in our county and also climate change. Next slide. And also the other challenge is really looking at these parcels that have been, you know, really this one looks like it's set for development, right? Is there any way it's adjacent to open space, permanent open space? Is there any way this can be a farm for a local food grower, farmer that's ready to expand their operation to something of this size? I mean, I think that that's part of our job looking forward to what we can do as a county. Next slide. And then finally, looking for more diverse investors in our program. Our local funds come from primarily gaming revenue, which I know is very different than most places. And we certainly use the match when possible from USDA and NRCS, but we really need to look at other options moving forward, and we are. Next slide. And then so here's a wrap up on the benefits. I think that you're welcome to review these again, but I think these are things that can help all of us that are working in this program. And then finally, last slide is my thank you and my introduction to the Strom family, and they're going to share their experiences in participating. And I have to tell you, both Tyler and Lee are also strong advocates statewide for farming, agriculture, and everything around that. And so we're happy to have them both as participants in our Growing for Kane and also in our farmland protection program.
Great, thank you so much, Janice. Lee and Tyler, before we get to you, let me just, a couple of questions came in for Janice, so let me get her to answer those very quickly. One is, Janice, can you elaborate on what the consultants you mentioned are being used for? Are they primarily for outreach to increase awareness by landowners and farmers, or some other use? I think just sort of, you talked about consultants.
We will be using consultants for outreach coming up soon, but in the past we've used AFT, created our very first 2 white papers identifying how a program, what the landscape was for programs around the country, and then how we can customize one to launch for our own program, and then came back to provide help with our Growing for Kane program. We've used consultants for economic analysis and specifically with our food hub and other local food related and farm related work. It's a lot, it's a very inclusive program that involves many things. It's very hard to deal with just the topic of land protection only in the program. You really need help. And I encourage everyone to do that. We've used our own funds and we've used grant funds, been very helpful. Surveys too are super helpful.
Great. So Janice, here's another question. What are program participants as mentioned? So I think this person is asking about how do you find program participants, which I assume are the ones who are selling an easement.
Well, at the very launch of the program, we did have a lot of press. We went involved a lot at the recommendation of AFT. We created learning circles around creating a program, and then definitely brought that to the membership of the Farm Bureau, which is very active in our county. But once we launched the program, we have not needed to market the program at all. It's sold from farmer to farmer, landowner to landowner. That creates adjacency. And it's a very well-known and well-respected program, but not because of marketing material. People who are interested in the program will approach. When, you know, I often do and did in the past anyway, lots of presentations locally to community groups about it. But it's the soft request of someone that approaches after the meeting that often leads to the application. I'm interested, how do I go about this?
Great, thank you. Yeah, and so that's just sort of underscoring that these are voluntary programs. You might target particular areas where you engage landowners, but that ultimately it is the right and ability of a landowner to decide that they want to participate or not. So I just think that's important to keep in mind. So thank you, Janice. We're going to keep going. We do have a couple more questions that I'm hoping we'll get to. And so Lee and Tyler, I'm going to cut short a little bit. I have long introductions here, but let me get to the highlights. So Lee is a partner in the Open Prairie Rural Opportunities Fund, a USDA licensed rural business investment company. He was nominated by President George W. Bush and confirmed by the Senate to the board of the Farm Credit Administration in Washington, D.C., where he served from 2006 to 2015. In 2008, President Bush designated him CEO and chairman of the board. Lee has over 40 years of experience in production agriculture. They are based in Kane County, where his ancestors settled in the late 1800s. Tyler is the managing director of the Illinois Agri-Food Alliance, a statewide nonprofit providing a neutral platform for convening diverse stakeholders to understand and address complex systemic issues. Tyler's expertise is in agri-food systems, ecological sustainability, food supply chains, and local regional food systems. He has a Master's of Science in Environmental Studies and Sustainability Science from Lund University in Sweden. And in his spare time, he operates a diversified direct-to-market specialty crop farm and apiary in the far west suburbs of Chicago. So thank you, Lee and Tyler. Look forward to you telling us more. To you.
Well, Chris, thank you very much. And Lee Strum here, and it was good to see Janice again. And appreciate all the time that we've spent together over the years in this preservation program in Kane County. I'm just going to take a couple minutes here, and then I'm going to turn it to Tyler. So yes, we are a father-son team on a working farm in central Kane County. So we're right in the heart of that first map that Janice had. We're in the critical growth corridor of Kane County. I am third generation, Tyler's fourth generation operating this farm. And I guess I just would quickly like to get to what was the incentive? Why does a landowner or a farmer find a program like this attractive? Well, for us as a family, and it included my mother who was still living at the time and other family members, we were driven to this program because of a long history in Kane County. As was mentioned, my ancestors, my immigrant Swedish grandfather and grandmother came to this country from Sweden in the late 1800s, settled in Kane County here. They bought the first farm in 1915, a 80-acre small dairy farm. They worked extremely hard to provide us, the future generations, a place to live and enjoy and work. And so I've also been very active with Kane County over my career as well. My father actually served on the county board in the mid-1970s for a period of time. My dad was a conservationist. I never met my grandfather. He was gone before I was born, but I heard the stories about the hard work. I knew that my father really loved the land. He was a conservationist at heart. he dug a pond on the farm so we would have a place for us as kids for recreation. My family is buried in a cemetery just a mile away from the farm. So this is home. The incentive for us as we saw the growth occurring around us, and a lot of my friends and neighbors who own farmland were selling their farms, and for what they could sell for in Kane County, they could go an hour or more west of here in central Illinois or even into Iowa and buy 3 or 4 acres of farmland for what they were selling 1 acre in Kane County. That was the value of the development price on the farmland. But when you're a family like us who respects the deep roots, the hard toil, love this area and want to stay, this program was a perfect fit for us. It was not about the money for us. It was about honoring a legacy. And that's why when Janice arrived in Kane County, and Janice and I spent a lot of time together in the late 1990s and in between just prior to 2002, we were one of the first group of 3 farms that were brought in that were the first entrants into the Kane County program. And I'll tell you, in response to that one question that Janice had about how they find producers, I had a lot of friends at that time in 2001 and 2002 when I was looking at the program and talking with them. They said, "Lee, you're crazy to do that. Why would you want to give up your future development values?" And I said, it's not about the money. It's about preserving our heritage. And Tyler is the next generation of our family. And he is turning part of the farm here into a local food systems farm. We have now a couple of small high tunnels on the farm where he raises vegetables that go into the local market. We've established some prairie grass plots on the home farm that Tyler will talk about. But that's why, for us, it was a great program. I mean, our county has acquired over the last 40 years thousands of acres of forest preserve land for open space. But this farmland preservation allows it to be permanently established as a farm, gives us, the farmers, the rights to do the agricultural practices and can maintain the agricultural heritage. So I simply mentioned those pieces of why, as a family for us, this was an important step and an opportunity. And it's funny, a lot of those fellas that my friends who said I was crazy 20 years ago, a lot of them then ended up signing up for the program, and some of them have entered the program. And then I know that there's a long waiting list of farmland in Kane County wanting to get into the program as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the generation who is really making this happen on our farm, my son Tyler.
Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks to Janice for inviting both my dad and myself to talk a little bit about our farm and our engagement in the Kane County Farmland Protection Program. I think my father Lee just gave a sort of great historical perspective of why we had approached the Farmland Protection Program and our interest in being involved with that. And wanted to just provide a very personal perspective on behalf of my experiences with this as the next generation coming into this, share a little bit about the farm and the benefits that we're seeing that are provided not just to us, but to our community at large. So, you know, as Lee mentioned, we're part of that first cohort of farms that went into the protection program back in 2001, 2002. At that time, I'm still in high school. Not really quite sure where my future is going to go. I was actually interested in agriculture, having grown up on the farm, selling sweet corn during the summer months with my 2 older siblings. But we were primarily a row crop farm doing corn and soybeans. I hadn't really thought about vegetable production. I really hadn't thought about returning to the farm at all. I actually went into my undergraduate at Iowa State University with a focus on aeronautical engineering. But actually, before I even started my first set of classes, I switched degrees into ag undecided, and then ended up pursuing a degree in ag business and economics. And I had an international focus to that degree, and it ended up taking me to Sweden, where I pursued my master's. And my master's actually happened to focus me back on the importance of local regional food systems. My master's was in sustainability science at that time, still a pretty emerging discipline to kind of understand systems holistically and the importance and value of systems. And I was a part of a diverse cohort of international students, and I was the sole ag kid in that program. But what that did was that really sparked in me really looking close back to home. You know, I'm thousands of miles away overseas, but I'm thinking back to Kane County and to my home farm. And again, the importance of what that farm brings in the Chicago food shed. And that actually started me down a road of thinking about returning back home and farming part-time while pursuing other professional opportunities. I ended up coming back to Illinois in 2010 following my master's degree, and got involved with the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, a global think tank situated here in the Midwest, and focused on energy and water, climate issues, but also agriculture, very global in its perspective. But it also allowed me and afforded me the opportunity to live at home, commute into the city, and start building up a future enterprise that I wanted to take part in on the farm, which was focusing on fresh fruits and vegetables, predominantly vegetables. So Angie, I don't know if I have control here of the slides. Oh, it looks like maybe I don't here, but so I'll have you click through. So just to give some perspective, so we are 45 miles due west of Chicago. I have a few maps coming up here to show. Now 5 generations represented. My little boy there, Eli, in the pumpkin costume, represents the next generation, as well as my niece and nephew, Rika and Teddy, in the lower left picture. As Lee mentioned, I mean, we have a long family history of really valuing open space, conservation, farming, obviously. And again, we entered into the Ag Conservation Easement program in 2002. You know, since then, we've done a lot with the farm. We continue to adapt and refine and try new things, and that's just part of being a farmer. We have one season to try new things, and we like to do that each and every year. Back in 2007, we actually started to take acreage out of production and turn it back into a native restored prairie habitat. It was situated next to an oak savanna. And then back in 2011, after I returned back from overseas, we started to transition part of the farm into diversified crops. Go ahead, next slide, Angie. Today, we're operating in my spare time and in our spare time with my dad's help and family help, a self-serve farm store. We both work full-time professionally, which keeps us away from the farm during the day. But we did set up a farm store actually at the start of the pandemic. Prior to that, we were growing products, mostly wholesaling to other farms, as well as providing some product to local area restaurants. Then when the pandemic hit, we needed a new outlet for produce. So we actually had transitioned a small building on our farm into a self-serve farm store. It's open every day of the week, 9 a.m. to 6. And we, over the course of the season, have about 90 different varieties of vegetables that we put in the store. Go ahead, next slide. And our farm isn't just really a place for the productive value. There's a lot more benefit that farms provide. And I love this quote from Aldo Leopold: "Land then is not merely soil, it's a fountain of energy flowing through a circuit of soils, plants, and animals." So I mentioned the prairie restoration. You can see some of our flowers here, as well as, our compass plants, our oak savanna. We have very mature oak trees on the property to host a wide variety of insects. We do a lot of integrative pest management on the farm, low use chemicals, no spray on most all of our crops. We have a praying mantis here. You can see a monarch caterpillar. And we also, Chris had mentioned in the introduction, we have an apiary. So I've been beekeeping for close to 9 years now on our farm. So next slide. Here's just an aerial shot of the Chicagoland region. You can see the density of the city there and where Kane County is located, where the blue dots in that, and then the white dots on the map to the right. So you can see we're very close to this urban-rural fringe of farmland, really nestled right up against real estate and commercial development. Next slide. Just another perspective of the 1840 landscape compared to, this is back in 2010, and I know Janice had shown some updated maps of the open space program here, but you can see how much of that land had really developed in just a short amount of time. Next slide. just another aerial shot kind of showing a different representation of that expansion of encroachment from the east of development. Comparison of 1939 compared to 2019, our farm there circled in yellow. Next slide. And then this is just an overshot of our farm and the acreage that's put into the Farmland Protection Program there in green. You can see where the Strom Family Farm icon is, the map icon. That's actually my father's land. And we, my wife and I, back in 2015, were actually able to purchase the adjacent farm parcel, which adjoined part of their land. It's the farm there on the bottom right of the map. And then in the yellow is where we have been spending time in restoring native prairie grass, as well as concentrating on restoring our oak savanna. And next slide. And this is just kind of one last interesting kind of visual shot representation of our farm. So again, you can see it's still a lot of rural area, a lot of corn and soybean production in our area, a lot of hay ground. We have some pumpkin production. Our neighbors are actually a big pumpkin producer. And then again, our area, part of our ground is in mixed use, hay ground, corn, soy, on rotation every other year. And then we also have the vegetable production there. So Andy, you can go ahead and close the slide and we'll just go back into our pictures here. Just to wrap up some comments, you know, one of my favorite quotes is actually from Paul Harvey, the radio personality, and he had a great quote that said, you know, despite all of our accomplishments, we owe our existence to a 6-inch layer of topsoil and the fact that it rains. And it's so true. Everything that we are today is really owed to that prime farmland soil and the capacity that we're able to grow such a rich diversity of crops on that soil. And the most important thing that I'd like to leave the audience with today is once that land is developed, it's gone. It's taken out of productive value. Sure, there are alternatives. We have urban agriculture, you know, vertical farming agriculture, but that top 6 inches layer is just so immensely important. And as we've heard from Remy and Janice and Chris, there's so much more value beyond just the productive capacity. There is the economic lens, that economic benefit of productive value, but there's also this environmental value and societal value. We are a farm, a diversified farm operation now. We have a self-serve farm store. We're serving our communities. They're able to get here, get fresh food when it's in season, every day of the week. And there's many farms like ours that share that similar type of story. Janice already mentioned some of the environmental benefits, things like water quality, putting in habitat for pollinators and insects and birds. Part of our oak savanna is home to bluebirds, and we've been supporting their continued existence here on our farm for the past 20 years. We have pairs of red-tailed hawks that have been here 20 years. We have pairs of great horned owls that have been here 20 years. So these farms and the protected farmland, they provide that value. They provide open space, visual open space. And there are studies out there, I encourage you to go out there and look at them, that open space, that scenic value actually helps reduce stress. It provides value to society, sometimes value that we just don't internalize on a day-to-day basis, but it is providing that value. So, you know, again, we are so thankful to the foresight of Kane County and the execution of Janice and Kane County officials over the years to have the foresight to protect the farmland within our very unique county that is really, again, nestled in the far west suburbs of Chicago. If you look at the entire Chicago region, we ought to have similar programs in all of the counties and around all of the states, in other concentrated urban areas outside of St. Louis and in Springfield and in Decatur and so on and so forth. But again, a testament to the commitments and the foresight, and I hope that I'll be able to leave parts of our farm to my son if he wishes to come back to the farm, but at least I know and my father knows that that farmland is going to exist into perpetuity and that it will continue to provide a benefit not just to us, but to the community at large. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Chris. Thank you.
There, I was on mute. So thank you so much. You guys are really an inspiration. It is so helpful to have your story and why you did it and how it seems like you have a thriving farm operation. Right now, I'm going to invite both Janice and Remy and Angie to join us all back as well and answer any last questions. I just want to make one point, because Lee, it was a point that you made in terms, and Janice sort of noted it when there was a thing on her on one of her slides that talked about how farmers have been using 1031s, which are like-kind exchanges. And what I have found interesting in doing this work over the past few years, and particularly in the Midwest, is the number of farmers who now feel like it has been the tradition to, if you need to, if you're surrounded by development, to cash in and to move further, right? Well, that further is now, it's not easy to go further, right? Further has become way more expensive and much more limited.
Well, let me just speak. So 40 years ago, 20 years ago, we were all corn and soybeans. And in Kane County, that is largely your open land, is row crop production, which requires an infrastructure of roads to haul trucks full of grain. You want to have grain storage, or your local cooperative access to, in our case, corn grown in this area either goes to ethanol production or goes to export channels overseas. But you need that infrastructure. And as you start to develop around that, it becomes more difficult for farmers to move equipment, to haul grain. As the population goes up, it becomes harder for larger scale farming. That's why in our case, Tyler is transitioning part of the farm to local production, which it blends well with a higher density population. So you need to keep that in mind as to incentives for farmers. I mean, some of my friends over the last 40 years have just got tired of dealing with traffic hassles, and they said, I'm going to go out where it's still all open farmland. And that was part of the incentive for them to cash out.
Right. Excellent point. There is one question, one comment. This is more of a comment. Someone who's saying that in their county, they're seeing quite a bit of zoning hearings to break off the farmstead from large tracts of farmland. It's taking away places that farmers can live if you're, again, allowing that farm and a couple of acres to be split off from the farmland. And I think that's important to also think about for those thinking about creating a PACE program, is how do you in fact make sure that that farmstead can stay with the property, because that is, we are increasingly seeing that housing is a challenge, and in fact the ability to create more housing that is affiliated with for farmers is important. So I don't know if anybody else has thoughts on that in terms of thinking about housing and these kinds of programs. Anyone want to offer any other thoughts?
Well, this is Janice. I can say that our Kane County program does offer the ability to split off a home, and our easements do not include the farmhouse. We made that decision to exclude the farmhouse for ease of monitoring and addressing. This doesn't mean that it's subdivided from the land. It just means that it's not part of the easement. But I will say, if people choose to cut off that farmland in terms of completely subdivide prior to the transaction, you're reducing the appraised value every time you do that. And so, there's that disadvantage as well. So I encourage people, to take a longer view because of the need of housing, keep the house attached to the land, but we do use that technique of going around the house for the easement itself.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm seeing what time it is. I need to turn it back over to Angie. I just want to express my thank you to all of you, Lee, Tyler, Janice, Remy, for joining us today. And let me give Angie the last word.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chris, and I echo your thanks. Thank you so much, Remy, Tyler, Lee, and Janice, for your great presentations and engaging conversation today. It's just really fascinating to hear your stories around protection of farmland in your areas. And thank you to all of you for joining us today to learn more about purchase of agricultural conservation easement programs. I ask that you please plan to join us again the same time next week on Thursday to learn more about the development of PACE programs or purchase of agricultural conservation easement programs, and how others have built successful campaigns to support these programs. So addressing some of the comments that we saw in the chats today. And then finally, at the exit of this webinar, you will receive an exit survey, and I ask that you please take the time to complete that. It helps us in the work that we do. So thank you again to all of my presenters and all of the attendees, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.